let's get started talking about it. Again, welcome to Sit. We're glad to have you with us. As Tilde said, we love your feedback and your comments. But when we came up with this show topic idea, I think all of us have had some experiences, whether it's directly, or indirectly, with dealing with abusive relationships and, the impact of domestic violence. So, ladies, what are your thoughts, experiences that you'd be willing to share?
Well, I think in my own experiences, I think emotional abuse has been the most prevalent. Unfortunately, when I was in my 20s, I still had a lot of things that I had to overcome from my past. So, and being abused as a young child, I still had a lot of anger, and fear. So, and that came out in jealousy and rage with my then really new husband. We were 23 and 20. And so I've been on both ends of the spectrum on emotional and verbal abuse, where I was the abuser early on in my marriage and would use derogatory comments to address my husband at that time, and it wasn't until he pointed it out and made me see things in a different light and to realize the hurt that I was causing somebody that I supposedly loved. I think when he put basically the mirror in front of me and showed me that I had become the very thing that I despised. That was really, really a pivotal moment for me. And so I'm very thankful that he had the courage to do that for me. And then also it started the whole process of really beginning those practices that helped me manage my anger, and manage what was coming out of my mouth. I think also growing up in a household where, it was really easy to tear people down instead of lifting them up was also not helpful. But again, I learned how to do that, and it just took a lot of practice. It took effort, not because it was so hard. It just took effort, like going to work out every day takes effort, and so relearning the way that I was communicating was an effort for me. And then years later, after divorce, being in a relationship that was the opposite, and being on the other end of that relationship and experiencing verbal and emotional abuse was again very, very difficult, so and it's not easy. I mean, a lot of times you think you're so strong, or you're such a strong woman, why would you put up with that crap? And I think when you're in the middle of it, it's just that pivotal moment in time where you finally say to yourself, I'm not going to put up with this anymore.
It's one of the most difficult things to understand and to get out of, for this goes for females and males. People think it's only women that get, abused. No, it's not. Men, it happens to men all the time. Because of the stigma that's out there, just don't talk about it as much. And there's not a whole lot of resources out there for them, and there needs to be.
Yeah, as I listened to you talk, I think for me, I started just kind of reflecting on my own experiences and childhood. And I grew up around very, very strong men and women who were strong in their silence and not necessarily dealing with it. And it was more the emotional and verbal piece. And, at the time when you're growing up in those situations, something's wrong, but you don't know anything else. And I remember vowing not to live in that situation. What I remember experiencing was, as a freshman in college, I dated this guy who was a little bit older than me, and he was very manipulative. So I remember one time he had bought a car, neither one of us had a car. And he bought a car and he goes, I want you to drive the car and drive me around. And I'm thinking, well, that's crazy. I mean, you're buying the car, you should drive it. But it was his way of having control. Mm-hmm. And then I remember when I broke up with him, he called me and said he was going to kill himself. And I remember it was something at that age to be able to go, well, if that's what you're going to do, then I can't stop you from doing that. And I said a few other things, but and we won't talk about that here. But you know, you think about those experiences and how, especially when you're young, and you think about the stats for young women, especially who are in these kinds of, you know, very challenging relationships and violent relationships, and they don't think about when it's the emotional and verbal abuse. They're always thinking that it's the physical piece, and you can really be manipulated and controlled in a way that you don't even know you're giving that, or someone has taken that from you.
Right.
Dynamics is very complex. I went through my own relationship pretty young, or early in my 20s. I was in college, and he did some pretty unfathomable things. And coming from a culture where we hide these things and kind of brush it under the rug, we couldn't talk about it because either you go through it, you accept it, and it was such a stigma at that time. And I think it took me up until last year to actually talk about it in public. And it was really hard, and if it wasn't for my parents and my faith in God, I don't think I would have come through it well. I mean, it got so bad to the point where I became friends with death. So, and I would not wish this upon my worst enemy.
So what was it for you, Go? Because I know some people might be watching that might be in that same position. So what was it for you that, you know, made you reach out for help?
To lose my parents' trust. To lose my parents' trust, because I was lying about things. I lied about my grades, and I lied about everything that was going on at that time. And come to think of it, I couldn't tell my parents because I knew, here I'm sending my daughter off to school and she's doing all this, and I didn't want them to think less of me. And I think it got so bad to the point where my mom got sick, and it had to come out. So.
But I'm so proud of you, and the fact that you were able to overcome that situation, because there's so many women who don't.
Right.
You know, whether they stay in those kinds of situations, you know, and it totally destroys your confidence.
Yes.
I remember questioning, you know, is there something wrong with me? Because I remember when guys would come up and say something, you know, a compliment, and he would get mad at me for them doing that. And so, you know, it was kind of like, really? Well, that makes no sense. But I think sometimes what happens is we confuse what love is. And because, you know, I don't think people recognize when you're in those kinds of relationships, the person isn't mean all the time. Because I hear women always saying, well, they should just leave. They should get away. And it's like, what you don't understand is when it's good, it's good.
Right.
You know, and so what you can do, what you would typically do is you justify the craziness, because when it really is good, it's good. And if it was awful all the time, I think people would get up and walk away, but it's not. And that's what makes it so difficult for a lot of people to walk away and pull away from those relationships like you did.
It's not the easiest thing to do. And, you know, as you mentioned, you know, why don't you just get out? It's not that simple.
No. Well, and it's interesting, I think, in our society, the way we view women in terms of if they're not with someone.
Right.
And so, you know, I think we push folks, especially very young, and I listened to my daughter and her talk about her friends and the value they place on being coupled. And I think as a society, we feel like, especially for a lot of women, that if you're not in a relationship and coupled up, you know, and that's what I think also drives people to get in situations that could be very damaging. You've got some great stats that I think are important for us to read to let people know this is really serious.
You know, when I was looking at these, I mean, they're very mind-boggling statistics. So I hope everyone is listening, and write notes if you want to. So every 9 seconds in the U.S., a woman is assaulted or beaten. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner here in the United States. And during 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner. So on a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to the domestic violence hotlines, and this is nationwide. The presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Now, tell me those are not mind-boggling statistics right there.
I mean, that's just ridiculous, you know?
But it makes me wonder, why is this such a part of our society? What's the thread that allows this? Because in some way it's accepted. I mean, when you look at some of the NFL situations that we've had recently, without going into detail and names, but there have been several. Why is this allowed, or there's a slap on the hand, you know, with the young man who's getting out for raping the young woman, and you're able to get out? Why do you think that exists in our society? I
think it's really, and this is a much bigger issue than probably we have time for, but I really think that it's the devaluation of women. You know, I mean, as forward thinking as we like to think that we are, I mean, those statistics show a very different story.
Yes, it does.
You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we're still living before women's rights ever happen, you know, and also to address the men, you know, because living in a backward society, you know, men still feel ashamed of being a victim. Right. So they're not likely to come forward either. So I really think that it's living in a society that is not that forward thinking after all, you know? So my question to you guys is, what can we do to change that mentality? And because that's really what we have to address is a mindset, right? That people are in. And is it cultural? Is it individual? I mean, what exactly is it that needs to happen within maybe our households to start, right?
And that's where
our
it needs
personal
to start.
relationships.
That's where it needs to start. Who are our role models? What are they telling us? What are they teaching us? You know, if there's a mother figure, if there's a single parent, this has to be talked about. We have to nurture our children to show them, you know, discriminate what's wrong and what's right. And it's got to start at an early age. I'm sorry.
And I agree. I think it starts with self-love. At some point, you have to say that I deserve better. Yeah. And really beginning to know that love doesn't hurt. It shouldn't. Can you have conflicts and challenges and disagreements? Yes, that's part of the human experience. But I think it's helping people understand their value, that you deserve more and you don't have to tolerate this, and there are resources. I think what frightens most folks from doing something is the systems in place, like the court system. Yeah. For a lot of women, they're afraid of going through that because what if I lose my kids? Right. Yeah. You know, and so it really is, you know, I think it's a both and. It's not just the individual piece. I think that's correct. I think it's changing cultures and how we see women and men and the roles that we play and what gender really means. But I think it's also examining the systems at work and saying to court systems, women can't be punished for coming out and talking about what's going on. And that has to change as well.
Right. And, you know, I think going back to family life, you know, both Gothamy and I attended your daughter's birthday party this past Sunday, which was an amazing experience. It was a beautiful experience, and I really thank you for inviting us, because I was really moved. And why I bring that up is because of what you did for her.
It was amazing.
It was amazing. I mean, here we wrote on cards, and there was 3 wishes that we had for Kazai that we were supposed to write, and there was maybe like 25 people, 30 people in the room, and the closest friends and family, and we each wrote 3 things, and then there was 3 things that we would have told ourselves at her age. And so that was emotional enough. But then at the end of the party, for me, when I just lost it.
That's when I started I got teary-eyed at that point,
it was laying hands on this young woman and your mom.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Praying for her and over her and her blessings. And I'm getting emotional now. But just beautiful, powerful, you know, and then for you to do it. It was what I wish that every family would experience, and every young girl and boy.
Can you imagine if that were to happen in every household, every get together? Things would be so much more different in today's age.
That's what I left there, Francois, thinking that it's like, and I told you, I expressed this to Go as we were walking. I was like, imagine if that happened in every single household where adults spoke over their children with such love and blessing, and not cursing. And I think that's a lot of times what creates this cycle of violence, right? Is curses, cursing and not blessings, and living in that sort of environment that continues to downplay women, or anything else that contributes to that type of behavior.
Children are sponges. They are sponges. Everything they hear, they're going to understand, and they're going to repeat. If they hear a curse word, if they're called a name, even the most simplest as dummy, that's what they're going to think they are. And that's got to change.
I remember hearing this story about this man who talked about his dad named him Winner and named the other son Loser.
Oh my gosh.
And what their trajectories look like in life. And long story short, you know what happened to the one that was Winner. He did well. And I think it proves the point of, we speak life and death. I mean, life and death is in the tongue. And I think, you think first and then you say it and you do it. And I think that's what happens so often, is we speak death over our kids, and we speak death to men and tell them, you're not going to be anything. You're just like your dad. And if the dad was awful, then you're basically telling your kid, you're going to be just like this, or you're a woman. We don't expect anything out of you. You're only supposed to do X. And I think we really have to look at the language and the power of words over our kids.
Like so-and-so.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we're surprised when they actually live into the role that we said, which is why we did what we did with her. I remember this young lady was saying, she's 24, and she said when she was 16, her parents did this party and they wrote letters to her. And she said at 24 years old, she still reads these letters and what it did for her life and who she is. And I thought, man, I want to do that, because that didn't happen for me.
Yeah.
I don't think my parents, I knew they loved me. They didn't think about doing that kind of stuff. And so it was really intentional for me to go, I want my baby to be able to have, that kind of going away into being a young woman. And that was, kind of the gist for that occurring. And y'all started crying, and I was crying, and I'm trying not to cry now, but you do make me think about it. There is so much power and value in what we say, and how can we create environments that are more loving and less violent, and watching what we let our kids look at too.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's huge. And I think society is a reflection of what we watch on TV now.
I agree.
I mean, look at what happens. It's like a show comes out, that is extremely violent, and then months later, it's happening.
Yes.
And somehow we watch.
Well, it's like the movie The Purge. Have you heard about this movie, The Purge? Well, it's a movie. I've never seen it, but they actually, in the movie, there's a day that's legal where you can kill whoever you want.
I've heard of that.
And so they've been talking about having purge days, people doing this. And it's like, wow, we don't realize how much death we put out into television and music, and wonder why the world looks the way that it does.
It's a catalyst. It's a catalyst to what plays into what's happening now.
So closing thoughts, ladies. If we had to, there's a lady in front of us right now who's going through that situation. What would you tell her based on your experience?
I think there's two things, and from two different perspectives that come to mind for me, is from a aunt or mother perspective, because I'm not a mother, I'm an aunt, but to speak life into kids.
Yes.
To be intentional about your words, to really consider the effects that what you're about to say will have a lasting effect on their future and the way that they feel about themselves. And second of all, to anyone out there as an adult that didn't have those loving words or those people in your life and parents in your life that didn't uplift you, and didn't build you up. And so you're still living sort of in the past because you haven't had that for yourself. I think of the Prayer of Jabez. Remember
Yes,
that? Where so Jabez was named kind of like winner and loser, right? And he was pretty much named loser.
Okay.
And so, but what he did is that he prayed to God and asked him to be blessed and to enlarge his territory.
And that he caused no harm.
Yeah, and that he caused no harm. And that's what I would tell everybody out there listening that maybe didn't have the right name and wasn't called the right name, you know, to really, really ask God to show you and reveal to you who you really are, because it's not those names.
Because this cycle can end. Yeah. And we can talk about it at such an early age. And that's what I encourage, you know, like you said, and parents to do. I have a nephew. He's 2 years old. He's about to have a baby sister. And my brother-in-law and my sister are two of the greatest parents I know. And they talk to him about, you don't hit. That's not right. You don't hit. We have to nurture these kids at an early age. And that's what I encourage everyone to do. And to those individuals that are experiencing abuse in their marriage or relationships, I encourage you to talk to somebody, to really, really contemplate who you are and what you want in life. And if you do value your life, talk to somebody, get out. And we have a number of different shelters. If you are going through this and you need resources, we have them.
Yeah, and we'll put them, Dave, will you put the links on there for us? And there's also a national hotline that we want to put up. But do you want to tell that to them?
I would. So the National Domestic Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233. 1-800-799-7233.
I think what makes this show so powerful is that we tell our stories. And that's what I would encourage women to do, is don't allow yourself to feel like there's something wrong with you. To your point, tell your story and allow people to know what you're going through. I remember meeting this woman who was abused by both of her husbands, and she will probably be watching. And she made a comment that one of them came up and told her, "You should be happy that I did this because I gave you a story." And I was like, oh my goodness, even in the manipulation trying to take that away. But the story is what freed her from those relationships, because she could use that for her own healing, but she used that to help other women. And I think that's so important for us to create community so that you don't feel alone, because you're not.
Yeah, and I think in telling of that story, you take that piece of your power back.
Yes.
And you stop the cycle of giving people power that they have no right to in the first place.
Right.
Remember, your life is valuable.
Mm-hmm. And you deserve the best.
That's right.
Yeah. So, well, this is awesome. I mean, I love talking with you all and doing this. And so thank you for watching and allowing us to tell our stories. Ladies, any comments you want to give to the viewers before we...
No, just thank you for joining us. You know, if you like what you're watching, please share it. Don't keep us a secret. The more, the merrier. And obviously, we love what we do. And if you like what you're watching, you can also follow us on our YouTube channel, which is Womanars. You can also watch it on the new womanars.com website coming up as well. So we'd love to hear your comments and other show ideas that you might have for us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a great week.